She doesn't belong here. Just look at her. Probably trying to pull a fast one with some fake ID. Claire Thompson, the branch manager of Pinnacle Trust's flagship Chicago branch, sneered, her voice loud enough to carry to her staff and a few nearby customers. The words, laced with disdain, hung in the air like a slap, aimed at a woman standing calmly at the counter, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a baseball cap hiding her natural curls. What Claire and her team didn't know was that this woman wasn't just any customer. She was Lydia Harper, the CEO of Pinnacle Trust, their boss, and those cruel words were about to spark a reckoning that would turn their world upside down. If you're as shocked as I am by this kind of prejudice, stick around for a story that'll make you cheer for justice. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and give us a like to support more stories like this. It was a crisp Wednesday morning in June 2024, and the grand marble lobby of Pinnacle Trust's flagship branch in downtown Chicago was humming with the usual rhythm of banking life. Tellers tapping at keyboards, customers shuffling in line, and the faint whir of a cash counting machine in the background. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, and sunlight streamed through the towering windows, catching the gold lettering of the bank's mission statement on the wall, empowering wealth with trust and respect. Into this scene walked Lydia Harper, a woman who had risen from a humble teller to the first black female CEO of one of America's top 10 banks. But today, she wasn't wearing her usual tailored blazer and heels. Instead, she chose a modest outfit to blend in, her face free of makeup, her purse a simple leather one she'd carried for years. Lydia wasn't here to sign contracts or lead board meetings. She was on a mission to see the truth of how her bank treated its customers when no one was watching. For weeks, she'd been troubled by reports buried in the company's data, complaints about unfair treatment, especially from customers of color. That never seemed to make it to the top. Satisfaction scores looked fine on paper, but when she dug deeper, she found troubling patterns: higher account rejection rates for minorities, lower loan approvals for Black and Hispanic business owners, and a steady stream of customers leaving certain branches without explanation. The flagship branch, managed by Claire Thompson, a 12-year veteran with a spotless record on paper, stood out. Claire's branch boasted high transaction volumes and strong account growth, but exit surveys hinted at something darker. Customers, particularly people of color, felt unwelcome, scrutinized, or outright dismissed. Lydia decided the only way to know the truth was to experience it herself, undercover, as an ordinary customer. She took a seat in the waiting area, her phone in hand, pretending to scroll but quietly observing the dynamics unfolding around her. What she saw in those first 20 minutes confirmed her worst fears. A white businessman in a sharp suit walked in and was greeted like royalty. Two tellers smiled. One offered him coffee, and he was whisked to a private desk without waiting. An older black couple, dressed neatly but not expensively, entered next. They were pointed to the waiting area with a curt, "Take a number." No smile, no warmth. A young Hispanic man in a delivery uniform approached the quick-service counter to cash a check. The teller, a young woman named Megan Carter, asked for 2 forms of ID, then a third. Her tone clipped and suspicious, even though the transaction was straightforward. The same teller had just processed a similar request for a white woman in yoga pants with a friendly chat about weekend plans. No extra ID required. Lydia watched this pattern repeat 5 more times over the next half hour. White customers served quickly, often with smiles. Customers of color met with delays, extra questions, or cold indifference. By the time Lydia stood up to approach the counter, she'd been waiting 40 minutes. Despite the branch being only moderately busy, 3 white customers who arrived after her had already been served. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was firm. She stepped up to Megan's window, sliding her ID and a withdrawal slip for $25,000, a legitimate amount for her high-tier business account. Megan's smile faded as she glanced at the slip, then at Lydia's face, then back at the ID, as if she couldn't believe they matched. "This is a pretty big amount," Megan said, her voice tight, loud enough to draw attention from the teller next to her, Nathan Brooks, without a word. Megan waved Nathan over, a senior staff member whose badge gleamed with authority. Nathan leaned over the counter, eyeing Lydia up and down. "We've had some issues with accounts like this," he said, emphasizing this in a way that felt loaded. "Can you tell me where this money's coming from?" Lydia kept her composure, her voice steady. "It's my account. I've provided my ID and bank card. I'd like to complete the withdrawal. Please." Nathan didn't budge. Instead, he turned to Megan and muttered, just loud enough for Lydia to hear. "Check the account history. Something's off." The words stung, but Lydia stayed calm, knowing every moment was being recorded by the bank's security cameras. She'd seen enough already to know this wasn't just one bad apple. It was a culture, a pattern, and it was happening in her bank, under her watch. Claire Thompson, the branch manager, was called over next, striding across the lobby with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. Her tailored suit and sharp heels clicked on the marble floor, and her smile was more formality than warmth. "Ma'am, I understand there's an issue with your request," Claire said, not bothering to ask Lydia's name, her tone dripping with condescension. "We can't just hand out that kind of cash to anyone who walks in." That's when Claire's earlier words, the shocking sneer about Lydia not belonging and using a fake ID, cut through the air, drawing gasps from a few customers nearby. Lydia felt the weight of every eye in the lobby, the silent judgment, the assumption she was doing something wrong. But she stood tall, her dignity unshaken, ready to turn this moment into something bigger than herself. This wasn't just about her. It was about every customer who'd ever been made to feel less than, and she was determined to make it right. Lydia's withdrawal slip for $25,000, perfectly legitimate for her high-tier business account, lay untouched on the counter, rejected not for policy but for prejudice. Megan Carter, the young teller, shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting with a stack of deposit slips, her eyes avoiding Lydia's. "I need to check with my supervisor again," Megan mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper, as she glanced at Nathan Brooks, the senior staff member looming behind her. Nathan, with his arms crossed and a smirk tugging at his lips, leaned over the counter, picking up Lydia's ID with exaggerated care, as if it might burn his fingers. "This amount," he said, loud enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear, "raises red flags. We've got protocols for accounts like this." The way he lingered on this carried a weight that needed no explanation. It wasn't about the account. It was about Lydia, her gray hoodie, her black skin, her audacity to exist in a space where they'd decided she didn't belong. Lydia's voice remained calm, honed by years of navigating corporate boardrooms where she'd been the only one who looked like her. "I've provided my ID, my bank card, and the withdrawal slip. The account is in good standing. Please process the transaction." Her words were firm, professional, giving them no room to twist her into the stereotype they seemed eager to pin on her. But Nathan didn't budge. Instead, he turned to Megan and muttered, just loud enough for Lydia to hear, "Pull up the account history. Let's see what kind of patterns we're dealing with." The implication was clear, in their minds. Lydia's request was suspicious, not because of the numbers, but because of who they assumed she was. A murmur rippled through the lobby, customers waiting in line, some pretending to focus on their phones, others openly staring. An older black man in a postal worker's uniform, standing near the ATM, shook his head slowly, his face a mask of resigned familiarity. He'd seen this before, lived it, and his quiet sigh spoke volumes about the weight of banking while black. That's when Claire Thompson, the branch manager, strode back to the counter, her heels clicking like a metronome on the polished marble floor. Her tailored suit and practiced smile screamed authority, but the warmth in her expression was as fake as the plastic plants in the corner. "Ma'am," Claire said, not bothering to ask Lydia's name. $25,000 isn't the kind of cash we just hand out. I'm sure you understand why we're being cautious." Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes raked over Lydia's hoodie and jeans, landing on her natural curls peeking out from the baseball cap with a flicker of disdain. "Maybe you'd be better off at one of those check-cashing joints on Halsted Street. They're more equipped for requests like yours." The words cut deep, a deliberate jab wrapped in corporate politeness, and a collective gasp escaped the onlookers. A white woman in line clutched her purse tighter, while a young Hispanic man nearby shifted uncomfortably, his own transaction stalled by a teller's excessive questions. Claire's words weren't just a denial. They were a public humiliation, a signal to everyone in the room that Lydia didn't belong. Another staff member, Evan Walsh, sauntered over, twirling a pen with the casual arrogance of someone who felt untouchable. "What's the story here?" Evan asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Big windfall? Lottery ticket payoff?" He chuckled, glancing at Nathan for approval, who nodded with a smirk. The assumption was blatant. A black woman in casual clothes couldn't possibly have earned that kind of money through legitimate means. It had to be luck, a scam, or something shady. Lydia felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same ache she'd carried through decades of proving herself. First as a teller working double shifts, then as a regional manager turning around failing branches, and finally as the first black female CEO of Pinnacle Trust. She'd faced skepticism at every step, from colleagues who questioned her credentials to board members who whispered about whether clients would trust her as the face of the bank. But here, in her own institution, the prejudice was raw, unfiltered, and playing out in front of a captive audience. "I've been a customer here for over 20 years, Lydia said, her voice steady, each word chosen with care. "I've provided all required identification. If there's an issue, I'd like it explained clearly." Claire's smile tightened, her patience fraying at being challenged in her domain. "The issue," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried to every corner of the lobby, "is that this kind of money doesn't fit someone like you? We serve a certain caliber of client here." The words were a gut punch, stripping away any pretense of protocol. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. The older black man by the ATM muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. Lydia's mind raced, not with anger but with clarity. She'd seen the data. Account rejection rates for minority customers at this branch were triple the bank's average. Loan approvals for black business owners lagged by 60%, and customer attrition among people of color was skyrocketing. This wasn't just about her. It was a systemic failure, and she was standing at its epicenter, a middle-aged white man in a golf shirt, waiting to deposit a check. Couldn't resist jumping in. "Can we move this along?" he said, gesturing at Lydia. "Some of us have actual business to take care of." His words, meant to dismiss her, only fueled the fire. Lydia's hand moved to her purse, the worn leather one her team had given her when she made COO, and pulled out her phone. "One moment, please," she said, stepping slightly to the side, her voice calm but resolute. As she dialed, Evan whispered something to Nathan, who stifled a laugh, thinking she was bluffing. Claire folded her arms, her confidence unshaken, certain she held the upper hand. But Lydia's call connected, and her words were clear. "Valerie, it's Lydia. I need you at the downtown branch. Now." The name. Valerie Mitchell, head of operations, sent a flicker of doubt across Claire's face, though she quickly brushed it off. She's just throwing around names, Claire thought, clinging to her authority. But the lobby's wall clock ticked loudly, each second marking the unraveling of a culture that had gone unchecked for too long. The security cameras, their red lights steady, captured every moment, every smirk, every slight, every word of prejudice. And Lydia knew the footage would tell a story far bigger than this one transaction. Claire Thompson, the branch manager, stood with her arms crossed, her tailored suit and sharp heels a stark contrast to Lydia's gray hoodie and jeans, her face a mask of smug certainty that she held all the power. "Wrap this up, ma'am," Claire said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Or I'll have to call security. We don't tolerate disruptions here." The word disruptions was a deliberate jab, painting Lydia, a customer requesting a legitimate $25,000 withdrawal, as the problem, not the staff's blatant prejudice. Behind Claire, Nathan Brooks, the senior teller, nodded approvingly, his smirk barely concealed, while Evan Walsh, another staff member, leaned against the counter, twirling a pen and chuckling softly, as if this were a game he was winning. Megan Carter, the young teller who'd first handled Lydia's request, looked increasingly pale, her hands trembling as she straightened a stack of deposit slips that didn't need straightening, her silence a quiet complicity in the face of her colleagues' cruelty. The lobby's customers were now fully invested. Some watched with morbid fascination, others with discomfort, and a few with quiet anger, like the older black man in a postal worker's uniform near the ATM, whose clenched jaw spoke of a lifetime of similar slights. Claire's earlier words, "This kind of money doesn't fit someone like you," still hung in the air, a public shaming rooted in race and appearance, amplified by Evan's mocking suggestion of a lottery win and Nathan's insinuation of fraud. Lydia, the undercover CEO of Pinnacle Trust, felt the weight of those words, not just as a personal insult, but as a betrayal of the bank she'd spent 20 years building. From her days as a teller to her historic role as the first black female CEO, she ended her call with Valerie, slipping her phone back into her worn leather purse, and turned to face Claire, her composure a fortress. "I've asked for my transaction to be processed," Lydia said, her voice steady, each word measured to give no fuel to their accusations. "If you're refusing, I'd like a clear explanation, per your own customer service policy." The specificity of her reference to bank policy caught Claire off guard, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she quickly recovered. Doubling down. "The explanation," Claire said, stepping closer, her voice rising for the audience, "is that we have a responsibility to protect our clients, our real clients, from suspicious activity. You're asking for $250,000 in cash, and frankly, you don't look like someone who has that kind of money." The lobby gasped, the naked prejudice now undeniable. A white woman in line whispered to her husband, "That's awful," but stayed silent, while the Hispanic man nearby, still waiting for his own delayed transaction, shook his head in disgust. Evan, emboldened by Claire's aggression, chimed in. "Yeah, what's the deal? You hit the jackpot or something? Or is this some kind of hustle?" His laugh grated, and Nathan added, "We've seen schemes like this before. We're just doing our job." The accusations, fraud, hustling, scheming, piled on, each one a calculated attempt to dehumanize Lydia, to justify their bias by painting her as a criminal. Lydia's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the resolve of someone who'd faced this kind of scrutiny her entire career. Boardroom whispers about her fit as CEO, colleagues questioning her promotions, clients assuming she was the assistant, not the leader. She glanced at the security cameras, their red lights steady, knowing they were capturing every moment of this injustice, not just for her, but for every customer who'd walked away from this branch feeling less than human. "I've provided all required identification," Lydia said, her voice unwavering. "Your job is to process my request, not to make assumptions about my character." Claire's face flushed, her authority challenged in front of her staff and customers. "Don't lecture me about my job," she snapped, her veneer of professionalism cracking. "This is a private business, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our standards." The word standards was a thinly veiled code, and the lobby's tensions spiked. A middle-aged white man in a golf shirt, growing impatient, interjected. "Can you just leave? Some of us have places to be." His words, dripping with entitlement, landed like another blow, aligning him with the staff's bias. The older black man by the ATM muttered, "Same old nonsense," his voice low but heavy with truth. Lydia's mind raced, not with anger, but with clarity. She'd seen the data. This branch rejected minority account applications at 4 times the bank's average, approved loans for black business owners at half the rate of white applicants, and lost customers of color at an alarming pace. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a culture, and Claire was its architect. Megan, the teller, looked physically ill, her eyes fixed on the counter, her earlier discomfort now a full-blown panic. She'd followed protocol by calling Nathan for a large withdrawal, but this public crucifixion of a customer was beyond anything she'd expected. Yet she stayed silent, her fear of rocking the boat outweighing her unease. Claire, sensing her staff's support, escalated further, signaling to a security guard, Jared Young, a young man barely 25, who approached with reluctance. "Jared," Claire said, not looking at Lydia, "please escort this woman out. She's causing a disturbance." Jared hesitated, his eyes flickering between Claire's icy command and Lydia's unshakable calm, sensing something wasn't right. "Ma'am," Lydia said to Jared, her tone kind but firm, "I'm a customer with a legitimate request. I've broken no rules. I have a right to be here." Jared shifted his weight, torn between his boss's orders and his gut. Claire's patience snapped. "Do your job, Jared, or I'll find someone who will." The threat hung in the air, and the lobby's wall clock ticked louder, each second amplifying the standoff. Customers now had phones out, some recording, others whispering, the drama no longer ignorable. Lydia's call to Valerie Mitchell was about to change everything. But for now, she stood alone, a single figure against a wall of institutional bias. Claire's final jab came, her voice a venomous hiss. "People like you always think you can game the system, but not in my branch." The words, captured by the cameras and seared into the memory of every witness, marked the point of no return. Lydia's eyes met Claire's, not with rage but with the quiet power of someone who knew the truth, and knew it was about to come to light. The tension in the marble lobby of Pinnacle Trust's flagship Chicago branch was palpable, as if the air itself held its breath after Claire Thompson's venomous words branded Lydia Harper a fraud in front of a captivated audience. Customers stood frozen, some clutching phones that recorded every second, others whispering in disbelief, while the security cameras overhead documented the scene in unflinching detail. Claire, the branch manager, stood with her arms folded, her tailored suit a symbol of her unchallenged authority, certain she'd put this troublemaker in her place. Nathan Brooks, the senior teller, leaned against the counter with a smug nod, and Evan Walsh, still twirling his pen, stifled a laugh, as if Lydia's humiliation was the day's entertainment. Megan Carter, the young teller who'd first handled Lydia's $25,000 withdrawal request, looked like she might faint, her hands trembling as she avoided eye contact, torn between guilt and fear of crossing her boss. Jared Young, The security guard Claire had summoned hesitated near the counter, his youthful face etched with unease, caught between his orders and a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. The older black man in a postal worker's uniform near the ATM watched with a mix of anger and anticipation, as if he'd waited a lifetime for a moment like this. Lydia, the undercover CEO of Pinnacle Trust, stood tall, her gray hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to the corporate polish around her, her composure unshaken by the barrage of prejudice. Her call to Valerie Mitchell, the head of operations, had just ended, and as she slipped her phone back into her worn leather purse, the lobby's grand double doors burst open with a force that echoed like a thunderclap across the marble floor. Valerie Mitchell stormed in, her navy suit crisp, her heels clicking with purpose, her face a mask of controlled fury that silenced the room. Customers turned, staff froze, and Claire's confident smirk faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Valerie's visits to the branch were rare, always planned weeks in advance with formal agendas. Her unannounced arrival, radiating authority, was like a storm breaking. "Stop this now," Valerie commanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, directed at Claire and her team. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" The question hung heavy, and Claire's eyes darted to Lydia, then back to Valerie, a seed of dread taking root. Nathan's arms dropped to his sides, Evan's pen stopped twirling, and Megan's face drained of color entirely. Valerie strode to Lydia's side, her demeanor shifting from righteous anger to profound respect. "I am so sorry you had to endure this," she said, her voice softer but carrying to every corner of the lobby. "Especially in our bank." Then, turning to face the staff, her tone hardened. "This is Lydia Harper, the CEO of Pinnacle Trust. Your boss—" The words landed like a sledgehammer. Claire staggered back, her hand flying to her chest as if physically struck. Nathan's mouth fell open, his earlier smugness replaced by raw panic. Evan's pen clattered to the floor, his face ashen as he realized the gravity of his mockery. Megan let out a small gasp, tears welling in her eyes, her earlier discomfort now a full-blown reckoning. The customers gasped, some pulling out phones to record the bombshell moment, while the older black man by the ATM nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through his stoic expression. Lydia, her dignity intact, stepped forward, her gaze steady as she addressed Claire, Nathan, and Evan directly. "You are terminated, effective immediately," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your actions violate not only our company's values but federal banking laws. There's no place for this in Pinnacle Trust. No raised voice, no theatrics, just the quiet power of a leader who'd earned her position through decades of grit, from teller to Stanford MBA to CEO, and who now wielded it to dismantle a culture of bias." Claire's face crumpled, a mix of shock, anger, and humiliation as her 12-year career unraveled in seconds. "You can't," she began, but Lydia raised a hand, silencing her. "I can, and I have." Lydia said simply, "Jared." She nodded to the security guard, who straightened with newfound purpose. "Please escort Ms. Thompson, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Walsh to collect their personal belongings and then off the premises." Jared, relieved to be on the right side of the moment, nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am," as he moved toward the trio. The lobby remained silent, the weight of accountability settling over everyone. Customers watched, some in awe, others in quiet approval, as the three disgraced employees stood frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by the dawning reality of their ruin. Lydia turned to Megan, who was visibly shaking, expecting to be next. But Lydia's tone softened, her eyes searching the young tellers. "Megan," she said quietly, so only those nearby could hear, You didn't speak up, but I saw your discomfort. That's a start, but it's not enough. You'll stay on probation, and you'll learn from this. Standing by while wrong happens makes you part of it." Megan nodded, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and shame washing over her. Lydia's decision wasn't leniency. It was a calculated chance for growth, a recognition that Megan's silence stemmed from fear, not malice. The older black man by the ATM caught Lydia's eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, "You did right." The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment, every expression, every consequence, preserving a truth that would soon ripple far beyond this lobby. Valerie, still standing by Lydia, was already on her tablet, pulling up security footage and branch data, her fingers moving with urgency. She knew this wasn't just about one incident. Lydia had uncovered a pattern, one her data had hinted at for months. Minority customers facing higher scrutiny, lower loan approvals, and a culture that let prejudice fester under the guise of protocol. Claire, Nathan, and Evan, now gathering their things under Jared's watch, moved like ghosts, their careers in tatters. The lobby's wall clock ticked on, marking 10:23 a.m., a time that would be etched into Pinnacle Trust's history as the moment justice walked through the door. Lydia stood at the center of it all, not reveling in the firings but already planning the next steps to ensure this never happened again. Not in her bank, not to her customers, not on her watch. The truth was out, and the reckoning had just begun. The silence in Pinnacle Trust's flagship Chicago branch was deafening as Claire Thompson, Nathan Brooks, and Evan Walsh were escorted out by security guard Jared Young. Their cardboard boxes of personal belongings clutched tightly, their faces a mix of shock and shame. The marble lobby, moments ago a stage for prejudice, now bore witness to a turning point, with customers and staff alike frozen, processing the revelation that Lydia Harper, the woman they'd dismissed as an outsider, was the CEO of the entire bank? The older black man in a postal worker's uniform near the ATM gave Lydia a nod, his eyes shining with quiet pride, while a white woman in line whispered to her husband, "I can't believe they treated her like that." Megan Carter. The young teller, spared from termination, stood trembling behind her counter, tears streaking her face, her probation a lifeline but also a mandate to change. Lydia stood at the center of the lobby, her gray hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to the corporate polish around her, her mind already shifting from the firings to the deeper work ahead. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about fixing a broken system that had allowed prejudice to fester in her bank. Under her watch, Valerie Mitchell, the head of operations, was by her side, her tablet glowing with data she'd been pulling up even as the confrontation unfolded, reports showing this branch's rejection rates for minority account applications were 4 times the bank's average. Loan approvals for Black and Hispanic business owners lagged by 65%, and customer attrition among people of color was nearly triple the norm. Lydia's voice broke the silence, calm but resolute, addressing the remaining staff who stood shell-shocked, some unable to meet her gaze. "What happened here today isn't just about a few bad choices," she said, her words carrying the weight of 20 years climbing from teller to CEO, navigating biases at every step. "It's about a culture that made those choices feel okay, and that ends now." Customers listened intently, some nodding, others clutching their phones, still recording the historic moment. Lydia turned to Valerie, who was already coordinating with headquarters, her fingers flying across her tablet to secure access credentials and initiate emergency protocols. "Get me everything on this branch," Lydia said quietly. "Every complaint, every transaction, every exit survey, especially the ones that didn't make it to the formal reports." Valerie nodded, her face grim but determined, knowing the data would paint a damning picture. Within minutes, The 21st floor executive suite at Pinnacle Trust's headquarters was a flurry of activity. Board members Edward Clarkson, Susan Hayes, and Robert Nguyen gathered in the observation room, where security feeds from the Chicago branch played on wall-sized screens. The footage was undeniable. Claire's sneering dismissal, Nathan's smug accusations, Evan's mocking jabs, all juxtaposed with the preferential treatment given to white customers. Edward, the board chairman, his silver hair catching the light, leaned forward, his voice tight. "This is our CEO," he said, disbelief giving way to anger. "How did we let this happen in our flagship branch?" Susan, usually reserved, shook her head. "It's not just this branch. It's a pattern. We've ignored the signs for too long." Robert, scrolling through branch analytics, pointed to the screen. "Look at these numbers. Minority customers are leaving at triple the rate. We've been blind." Lydia, still in the lobby, was already mapping out her next steps. She called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon, knowing the fight to transform Pinnacle Trust would face resistance. Some board members had hesitated to appoint her CEO, citing client comfort with her as a black woman leading a top-tier bank. Now, she'd use the footage and data to force accountability. By noon, she was in the boardroom, the Chicago skyline visible through the windows, presenting a plan that would redefine the bank's future. "We're launching the Fair Banking Initiative," Lydia announced, her voice steady, her hoodie replaced by a tailored blazer she'd kept in her office. "We're investing $100 million over 5 years, training programs, policy overhauls, and community outreach to ensure every customer is treated with respect, no exceptions." The boardroom was silent, some members shifting uncomfortably at the price tag, others nodding in agreement. Edward, the chairman, spoke up. "This is bold, Lydia, but it's risky. Admitting fault publicly could hurt our reputation." Lydia met his gaze. "Ignoring this hurts us more, legally, financially, and morally. We're not just fixing a branch, we're rebuilding trust." She laid out the evidence, security footage showing disparate treatment, data on discriminatory practices, and exit surveys from customers like Marcus Tate, a black entrepreneur whose loan was denied despite a stellar credit score, Sophia Alvarez, a Hispanic professional steered away from premium accounts, and Daniel Kim, an Asian small business owner burdened with excessive documentation. "These aren't just numbers," Lydia said, her voice rising with conviction. "These are people, our customers, who deserve better." The board approved the initiative, though not without debate, and Lydia appointed a Client Equity Advisory Council, inviting Marcus, Sophia, and Daniel to join, ensuring their experiences would shape new policies. Back in the branch, Lydia met privately with Megan, the teller on probation. "You didn't speak up," Lydia said, her tone firm but not unkind. "But you knew it was wrong. That's where change starts. You'll train under new management, and I expect you to lead by example." Megan nodded, wiping tears, her relief tempered by a resolve to prove herself. By day's end, temporary leadership was in place, and every employee in the branch was scheduled for mandatory anti-bias training. Lydia's initiative included tying bonuses to equity metrics, implementing anonymous demographic surveys to track service disparities, and posting a new sign in every branch. "All customers deserve respect and fairness. If we fall short, call this number." The number connected directly to her office. The lobby, now resuming normal operations, felt different. A weight lifted, a promise made. Customers like the older black man lingered, watching Lydia with a quiet respect, knowing they'd witnessed history. The cameras, still rolling, captured not just an ending but a beginning, a commitment to a bank where no one would be made to feel less than, ever again. The marble lobby of Pinnacle Trust's flagship Chicago branch slowly returned to its usual rhythm, with tellers resuming transactions and customers moving through the line. But the air felt different, lighter, charged with the promise of something new. Lydia Harper, still standing at the center of it all, her gray hoodie now a symbol of her undercover mission, surveyed the room not with triumph, but with the quiet determination of a leader who knew the real work was just beginning. The older black man in the postal worker's uniform caught her eye one last time before leaving, his nod carrying the weight of shared understanding, as if to say, "You've done what many of us couldn't." The security cameras, their red lights steady, continued to record, preserving a moment that would echo far beyond June 2024, a moment that marked Pinnacle Trust's commitment to change. Lydia's $100 million fair banking initiative, announced hours earlier in the boardroom, was already taking shape, with Valerie Mitchell, the head of operations, coordinating with legal and HR to roll out sweeping reforms. By the following week, Lydia stood at a podium in Chicago's grandest hotel ballroom, the city skyline glittering through the windows, facing a sea of journalists, cameras, and community leaders. Her tailored blazer replaced the hoodie, but her resolve was the same. "Pinnacle Trust is owning its failures," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And we're investing $100 million to ensure every customer, every single one, is treated with the respect they deserve." The room buzzed as she outlined the initiative: mandatory anti-bias training for all 12,000 employees, revised hiring practices to prioritize diversity, and performance metrics tying bonuses to equitable service, not just profits. She introduced the Client Equity Advisory Council, featuring Marcus Tate, a black entrepreneur whose loan had been unjustly denied, Sophia Alvarez, a Hispanic professional pushed away from premium accounts, and Daniel Kim, an Asian small business owner burdened with excessive red tape. Their stories, shared publicly for the first time, brought tears to some in the audience, their lived experiences now shaping the bank's future. "This isn't just about fixing mistakes," Lydia said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about building a bank where everyone belongs." The press conference made national headlines, not just for Pinnacle Trust's unprecedented admission of systemic bias, but for the concrete, measurable steps to address it. Back at the branch, Megan Carter, the teller on probation, threw herself into her new role under interim management, attending training sessions and speaking candidly about her failure to act, determined to be part of the change, the branch's new sign. "All customers deserve respect and fairness. If we fall short, call this number." Connected directly to Lydia's office, and calls began pouring in, not just complaints but stories of hope, customers feeling seen for the first time. Over the next 6 months, Lydia returned to branches across the country, often unannounced, blending in with casual clothes to observe the changes firsthand. In Atlanta, she saw a black couple welcomed with genuine warmth. In Seattle, a Hispanic small business owner received a loan approval without excessive scrutiny. In Miami, an Asian retiree opened a premium account with ease. The data reflected the shift. Minority account rejections dropped by 70%. Loan approvals for Black and Hispanic entrepreneurs rose by 55%, and customer retention among people of color improved dramatically. But Lydia knew data alone wasn't enough. Culture had to change. She personally reviewed training programs, developed with input from civil rights organizations, ensuring they addressed real-world scenarios, not just corporate checklists. In board meetings, she faced pushback from holdouts like Edward Clarkson, who worried about costs, but her response was unwavering. "Fairness isn't a cost, it's an investment in our future." Susan Hayes and Robert Nguyen, initially skeptical, became vocal allies, citing the 20% increase in new accounts from minority communities as proof. Lydia's leadership extended beyond the bank, with community outreach programs funding financial literacy workshops in underserved neighborhoods. helping people like Marcus Tate expand his business and Sofia Alvarez mentor young professionals. The Client Equity Advisory Council met monthly, their insights leading to policy tweaks, like simplifying documentation for small business accounts. Lydia's direct line became a lifeline, with customers sharing stories of newfound trust. One woman, a single mother, called to thank the bank for approving her first home loan after years of rejections elsewhere. The older black man from the Chicago branch, whose name Lydia later learned was James Carter, wrote her a letter, saying, "I've banked here for 30 years and never felt seen until you walked in." His words hung in her office, a reminder of why she fought. Pinnacle Trust's transformation wasn't perfect. Some employees resisted, and a few branches lagged. But Lydia's relentless focus kept the momentum going. She became a national figure, invited to speak at conferences on corporate accountability. Her story, a case study in leadership that didn't just react to crisis, but reshaped an industry. The bank's stock rose 15% in 6 months, proof that fairness was good business. Yet for Lydia, the real measure was in the faces of customers who no longer felt invisible. One evening, she slipped back into the Chicago branch, again in a hoodie, unnoticed by new staff trained under her initiative. A young black teller greeted her with a smile, processed her transaction without a second glance, and wished her a good day. As Lydia left, she glanced at the mission statement on the wall. Empowering wealth with trust and respect. And for the first time, it felt true. The cameras, still rolling, captured a quieter victory, a bank where dignity wasn't negotiable, where no one would be made to feel less than. Lydia's legacy wasn't just in the policies or the numbers. It was in the trust she'd rebuilt, one customer, one branch, one story at a time.